All right. So I'm going to work on the bot this afternoon. I'm almost done now. But yeah. But anyway, and the questions on the 425 name. So yeah, thank you, Bolt. So yeah, it's the HTTP code for too early. That's one. And the show used to start at 7 a.m. Christos time, which was pretty early for him. And then yeah, 425 is the area code for Redmond. I actually just forgot. I don't know why it just dawned on me over the weekend. 425 is actually my house number too.
No way. Your house is 45 and you didn't even realize that for the last 7 months that we've been streaming? 8
Pretty
months
much.
now.
Pretty much. Yep.
Somebody could say that it was your idea, considering that you have such a connection to 45, and yet it wasn't.
And the thing is, I type my address 30 times a day. You know, you buy something, you order something, and it's never once dawned on me until this weekend. I was sending somebody a link, and I typed in 425, and then the rest of my address showed up. And I was like, oh, that's right. I do live at 425. So
no, JP did not give the show name Caparino GR. It was our manager that came up with the idea as we were looking at 400 level codes, like 404, 403. And he was like, 45. It's the Redmond area code. Plus the too early because 10 a.m. Eastern is 7 a.m. Pacific. Don't make that mistake. Don't be a Christos.
Yeah, we originally were going to call it like, let's see, we had Identity Crisis, JRR Token. I mean, we had some what I thought were some really good
fantastic
ones.
names.
But he came in and said, he's like, no. Like, it needs to be more abstract. And here we are.
Way too abstract now. We have to explain it.
And then we talked to the people that help us build the graphics, and they're like, "Oh, what does 425 mean?" And we're like, they're like, "We love ones that are really abstract. Like, we love when there's a story behind it." And we're like, oh, "Okay, cool. Well, you guys are the super artsy ones. We're just the
we're the code monkeys.
We
don't know anything about that.
We're just a couple of yucks." So anyway. My browser's totally locked up, by the way. So I hope that the stream is still cranking. So
it's still cranking. It's
okay, good.
Going well. So far, so good, at least.
Okay, so we've done Blazor server side and Blazor client side quite a few times floating around here. And early on, the story wasn't great. It was, you had to ask for all the scopes up front, and there was some weirdness where once you sort of went from the HTTP side to, okay, we've upgraded these WebSockets with Blazor Server, you end up in a position where you can't ask for consent. So incremental consent, dynamic consent, that sort of stuff. All of that was broken, wasn't working. Because you can't, a WebSocket connection, there's no HTTP request response to go back and look at because it's a socket at that point. So there's not a good way, or at least not an easy pipelined way to say, hey, go redirect the user over to go do some stuff, right? Which meant if you were doing Blazor server side, or even, I guess, Blazor client side, but not to the same degree, when you're doing Blazor client side or server side, you get in this weird position where you were writing identical code to what you would write in, say, an MVC app, but then nothing would work. You could do Razor Pages server side without Blazor, and nothing would work the way you expected it to.
Blazor!
Yeah, I mean, there's so many days where it was like, okay, this is what you do for all of .NET, and then this is what you do with Blazor. And it drove me absolutely crazy. And we don't have we don't have the full story of, well, yeah, it's just identical anymore, but we are closer. So,
very close.
And then we had a viewer call us and reach out to us and tell us he was having some trouble with stuff. So we said, sure, we'll be happy to help. And and we ran into an interesting issue, and we learned some new stuff, but we also ran into an interesting issue. So so this app that's in front of us, this is just a straight up Blazor server side app that uses Azure AD.
So did you do file new project like .NET CLI new Blazor server, and that's auth Azure AD or single tenant to get it also, and we're using B2C. Are we using B2C for this one? If I remember correctly, I think we're using B2C, right? Oh, sound's gone. Am I out of the stream, or is JP out of the stream? Can you guys hear us? Did JP just disappear, or is it me?
No, I'm still here. I just I tried to open a browser and it blew up. So.
Okay.
But that's okay.
Interesting. Are you running out of tabs?
No, it's fine now because the whole browser restarted. So yeah.
I think it was OBS Ninja not feeding back to me. Anyway.
So
this one is using B2C, right?
Well, so I've got two forks of the same project. So I'm going to get this.
Okay.
I'm going to get this link out here. So it started with actually had a different question. Somebody said, "Hey, I found that repo, and it doesn't seem to be working the way I wanted it to." Right?
Okay.
And the reason was I had some really old code in there. Right? So here's the link to the repo: MSID Blazor Server, Blazor AD graph, something like that. So on so I got a graph branch or a normal branch, right? That's our main branch, and this one just calls multiple. This just calls multiple APIs. So the key here, you'll notice, and it calls two APIs. So the key is we request all of these, or we put all these in up front, right? So we've got these three here, and by using these three, we're going to say, hey, we want these two graph permissions of user and mail.read, but we also want user impersonation so we can go look at Azure stuff. So this is the scope you need to call the Azure API. And since Graph and the Azure API are two separate things, then normally this would be an incremental consent kind of a situation. So I've asked for these, and then when I actually need them in my app, which we're gonna go look at. When I need them, we're gonna have to get another token, right? Because I can't get more than one. I can't get an access token for two different resources in the same request.
Yes.
Right. So I can't come in and say, give me a token for the graph and give me a token for Azure AD. Or sorry, for the Azure REST API.
Yep.
We have to have two different requests. And so normally the way that works is you ask for it when you need it. And so asking for it when you need it, then you're good to go.
But do you need to pass all the scopes in the enable token acquisition to call downstream? So if I had like 4 different access tokens that I need to acquire, do you need to pass all the scopes here?
You do. So that was the interesting thing I found about the Blazor side, was that you do actually need these. And this is kind of what drives a consent screen. So this is what's going to drive a consent experience, which is where you get popped up and it says, hey, do you want to allow this app to do this stuff? And so what we're essentially doing is we're going to ask for all these scopes up front from the user. We're just asking for them to consent. We're not actually asking for a token for these just yet, right?
Yes. So that's very different to normal ASP.NET Core apps with Microsoft.Identity.Web, because we're still using Microsoft.Identity.Web here. But with Blazor, you need to be explicit and do it up front when you set up your authentication.
Oh, I even put a comment.
Take a note. Take a note.
I even had a comment.
Take a note because
which I completely forgot, which was be sure to request all required permissions up front.
It's fine.
So,
it's fine.
So this is pretty normal. And the Cosmos cache, you don't even have to worry about the Cosmos cache. Like that's one of the changes. We were using it for something else. We're not using it right now, so it's there. It's configured, but whatever. So we've got HTTP client, which we need for making API calls. We've got add authentication. This is all Identity.Web stuff, Microsoft.Identity.Web stuff. The rest of this is pretty straightforward. So we've got the normal add controllers with views, and we're going to add Microsoft Identity UI. So this is what gives us all the stuff that redirects us and handles all the UI for challenging a user and then redirecting the user over to sign in and all that sort of work. We're going to use Razor Pages, of course, because it's a Blazor app. And the one extra thing we have to add now is on server-side Blazor, we've got a new extension method called Add Microsoft Identity Consent Handler.
Very important.
Yep.
Again, take a note, friends.
I'll even take a note here. This is important. What was it?
Important in French. Sorry.
This was what it was in CSS land. You had to put a bang import it in front of everything.
Yes. It
so
still is.
So the consent handler comes along with Identity.Web. So it's not something you have to go and write, but you need to make sure it's added to the services collection. And this is what's going to do that, right? And then we're still using the weather forecast service because whatever.
Obviously, what else is there?
Yeah, it's part of the template. So we got to make that change. So this is probably the biggest change, combined with the fact that we're going to have we're going to request all of our scopes in here up front. So let's go look at how we use them. So I'm going to go to my fetch data page. This is fetchdata.razor. And fetchdata.razor, we're going to take two of these things that Identity.Web gives us, and we're going to inject them. So the first one is token acquisition, which if you're used to MVC, this is the same as the iToken acquisition that you inject into the constructor of your controllers. We're just injecting it into a Razor page here. And then we're also going to inject the descriptively named Microsoft Identity Consent and Conditional Access Handler. Now, the problem with this is that, in fact, it's not named specifically enough because it's the identity consent and conditional access and also no user signed in handler, but whatever. We can skip that part because it won't work then. I'm going to put in a PR to make it even more verbose. I'm going to see if I can actually, under 300% zoom, make just the name of the class go off the page. So anyway, so we've got our consent handler, and this is a really important part. Again, this is probably the other most important part of the whole thing. So we've, I mean, the fact that it's Microsoft.Identity.Web, you think we could at least just get down to, consent and conditional access handler, but whatever. I don't make the rules. I just tell everybody else the rules. So, so this is our fetch data Razor page. So this is in a normal Razor template, you're going to have this fetch data page, and it's going to go to show you a weather forecast. So I've made a few changes. Namely, we're going to have a user display name here, and then I'm going to show you the user's mail. All right, so we're going to get the mail from the graph, and so for each mail message and messages, which we'll go look at here, and then I'm also going to show the Azure tenants because why not? We want to show both of these APIs working, so let's make both of these APIs work. So for each one of the tenants, we're going to show the display name, right? So this is just the markup, nothing too exciting here. Let's get this out of the way. Sounds like my kid, at least one of my kids, has just arrived at the house. So I hope they don't come crashing through the ceiling. Anyway, so we've added a couple new variables here. We've got mail messages, tenants, user display name. These are all the things we want to show, and they're just arrays. Array of messages, array of tenant. And we have an HTTP client that we're going to use to go actually make the calls, right?
Zoom in a tad. Maybe hide your files and then zoom in a tad for me.
There we go. All right. So
awesome.
In our oninitialized async, and that's not to say that not other better ways to do this, but at least this is how mine's structured for the sake of demonstration. We're going to create an HTTP client that we're going to go and use. And the forecast service is still getting called, but we're not doing anything with the data. But now I get these two new ones, Graph token and Azure REST tokens. We got these two extra tokens that we're going to get, and we're going to use the token acquisition service to go and get them. So we're going to get the access token for user async. We're going to do it twice. I don't know if those
so do I get prompted twice to sign in?
No, you don't. I don't know if those are screams of joy or screams of pain, but somebody upstairs is either having a great time or a terrible one.
Having fun, yes.
So we're going to get our graph token, and then we're going to get our REST token, and we're wrapping both of these in a try-catch, and we're going to catch the exception, and then we're going to hand that exception off to the consent handler. So you remember we injected consent handler up before, right? Hi, Sahil. Thanks for coming. So we injected consent handler earlier, and that consent handler, this is the thing. This is the new thing that I'm excited about. It's in like Identity Web 1.4 and up, I believe. This is the thing that's actually going to handle doing a redirection for you in the event that you need to either consent, right, or user needs to MFA, or in some cases user may not be signed in, or for whatever reason you need to redirect a user normally. Hey, Layla, thanks for the raid. Yeah, thanks for coming and hanging out.
Everyone. 51 people. I don't know what you guys were doing, but right now we're doing Blazor authentication and explaining the new nuances of the authentication. In Blazor Server.
Yeah, some new Blazor stuff. So thanks for the raid, Layla. I hope you guys are working on something fun. We are not, because we're working on identity again. So
well, come on, don't say that. Identity is fun.
That's okay.
Oh, they were doing Blazor too. Check that out.
That's true. Oh, you were doing Blazor too? Oh, good. Nice.
Well, perfect. It's almost
That's
like
awesome.
we joined forces behind the scenes without knowing. It's totally random, right? It's random, people. It's random. We did not collude to have these streams back to back, but it's nice to have the Blazor fans here.
See, I'm glad you chose this. That's awesome. So
yes.
Okay. So anyway, so what we're talking about for everybody just joining, we are talking about using Azure AD or Azure AD B2C with Blazor server side app so that we can do things like dynamic consent. So normally in Blazor we can't do it, and now we can as of Identity.Web 1.4. So we'll be able to redirect a user and say, hey, go sign in. Go sign in and consent to this or approve this or, whatever. Which we couldn't do before. So anyway, our consent handler is going to be the thing, and we're going to pass our exception over to handle exception. So
now it's important because you have to try catch this thing. You can't just have the consent handler just sitting there doing stuff. You have to do a try, and you have to throw an exception so the consent handler can catch it.
That's right. And the other thing about this too is, if there's a larger try scope around this call, and you don't call consent handler, it will eat it, right? So because I was running through this and I'm like, well, the consent handler's never running, but it's actually because I was doing a try catch somewhere else that was actually catching the exception. So your exception needs to be bubbled up at least enough for a consent handler to go and catch it. So, so anyways, we've got our consent handler, and by doing this, and we're going to go watch this work here in just a minute. By doing this, we'll now be able to run this and go get an extra access token if we don't already have one, and be able to use it downstream. And so, to answer your question, yeah, we originally Blazor server side, because it was a socket connection, there was no sort of semantic for redirect the user. And so consent handler was born, and thus here we are. So consent handler is the thing that's going to break that socket and do a redirection. And then we're going to make a couple HTTP calls. So the first one we're going to make to the graph. We're going to go show some mail messages out of the graph. And then the next thing we're going to go do is go call the tenants API and Azure REST and the Azure REST API so we can go see it. They need two different tokens, right? And in fact, if we look at our headers here, you'll notice that this header, we're using the Azure REST token, and in this graph call up here, we are using
the graph token.
The graph token. So, so the first thing we're going to do, and we got a couple classes down here at the bottom. These are just essentially just layouts so that we can we can show our data, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is let me get a new browser window up in a different profile, since I don't want to use work for this. We get this other profile up. And in our other profile, the first thing I'm going to do is go unconsent to these apps, so that we can see consent happening. So if you've ever
test it live, very good. Yeah.
If you've ever consented to an app, so if you've hit the agree button in a Microsoft app, be it a third-party app or one of your own, if you want to undo that consent, you can do that by going to My Apps, which is myapps.microsoft.com. And in here, you'll be able to say, hey, I don't want to actually use this app anymore, so I'm going to skip it. I'm going to delete it, right? I want to revoke my consent. That's essentially what we're doing. So we're going to let this load up here. Yeah, so we'll let this load up. So I'm signed in. And let's see, what is this one called? Blazor Server Side AAD. So let's get rid of these.
Look at you and your descriptive name. I love it.
I know. Doesn't happen that much. So it's got permissions that I've already consented to, and you can go do this yourself. So if you want to go look at the apps that you've consented to, you can do this yourself, and you can revoke them. So it says I've consented to 5 graph permissions, sign me in, maintain access, read my profile, read my mail. But I've also consented to Azure Service Management. Funny enough, Azure used to be called Windows Azure, and the API used to be called Service Management, ASM, right?
We kept that name?
Yeah, it's still called Azure Service Management API. Don't let that confuse you, though. This is
blast from the past.
This is the REST API, right? So I'm going to revoke these, which is going to take a minute, but I'm going to revoke them. So now I won't have permission to this app anymore. Well, more appropriately, the app won't have permission to anything of my stuff anymore, right? Like that's the key. So I don't have anything there. There's a second one that showed up. Let me make sure that they're all gone. I don't know what the second one is. To be quite honest, it may just be something else named similarly, but we're going to revoke those permissions too.
This is scarily similar.
Yep, because I don't remember which one it was, but we're gonna yank these two out. One of them's probably in a different tenant. So we've done our revocation. Let me see. If I search for Blazor again, let's just make sure all of our revocations have happened. It usually takes a minute for it to do it, so whatever. It's going to take a minute. But that's cool. I'll give it a minute to make sure everything's gone. Maybe it'll error and say, no. It says several minutes, which is a bit... several minutes is one of those...
Is there a way to do it Is there a way to do it via the Azure AD portal? Like go to the service principal and go and wipe stuff out?
Yeah, so admins can also go and revoke consent. And we'll go look at what that looks like while I'm waiting, just for the sake
Cool.
just for the sake of delay.
You don't have to do it via the My Apps. You can brute force it via the portal. Can you brute force the right?
So if you want to do this, if you as an end user want to revoke an app, you go to My Apps. If you as an administrator find that people are using an app that's maybe, say, malicious or that you don't like, or you just want to be what was the BOFH on the register, right? The operator from hell. If you just don't want to be pleasant to your users and don't want them to enjoy coming to work anymore, you can also come and do this revocation yourself. So if we go into the app registration, because this is an app that's in my tenant, so it's not like
revoke office permissions.
It's not a third party, but if we go to API permissions, these are the permissions that we have. And you'll notice that admin consent has not been set for any of these. Now, it's also not required, but admin consent has not been granted here, right? If I were to remove some of these permissions, for example, but a user had already consented to them, I would see them under here, right? So as an administrator, you will still see... as an administrator, you will see permissions that people have consented to, right? So this is the enterprise apps sort of view of my app, which is typically what an administrator would see, not so much a developer. And you see admins have not consented to anything. User consent, however, one total user has consented to these. So these haven't been revoked just yet. They're
I wonder who that is.
I don't know who that user could be. It's my other user. So, but if I didn't want these here, we could also go and revoke them, or we could grant admin permission, right? So if we had some admins, if an admin came in and said, "Hey, I don't want to do this," or I don't want my users calling and asking me to do this, an admin could come in and do consent themselves. But users, we can also see who has done consent, just to get an idea of who's using what apps and why they're using it and whatever, right? And then Sean Weinberg, Blazor. So Blazor is a way of it's a way to build apps that run on the server side. Well, there's WebAssembly, but there's a server side too, which is all about streaming changes to the client rather than having the client go through a typical HTTP request response type thing. So it's sort of like using WebSockets to stream changes back to our app. As opposed to I make a request to the server and then I might make a bunch of JavaScript requests to go and fill data in or whatever. It's pretty cool. We've actually ended up using it a whole lot more than I ever anticipated. So, and then there's also Blazor client side, which is on the client, so it's running in the browser. So if you have done .NET and you don't want to get into JavaScript, or you don't like JavaScript or whatever, and you want to use .NET to write browser-type code, you can do that too, which is called Blazor WASM, W-A-S-M, for WebAssembly. So, okay. Blazor
for all the
server-side.
follows, Sean and Crystal Coder. We appreciate you joining us this thing.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. So we've got our app. So let's go run it. Let's see how far we get. Hopefully my revocation has happened by now. And I will be prompted to go and sign in. So, let me see. Blazor, they're still showing up, but whatever. We're going to run it anyway and see. All right, so let's do a .NET run here. Oops. And, I got let's make it here. Blazor, server-side, .NET run. Okay, let's go run this and see what happens. So we got our run. It's running, almost running. It's building. Cool. Let's go to localhost 5001. So we've got localhost 5001. I'm being asked to sign in. And so now it says, hey, would you like to... Oh, I got to change my config. My config's a little bad right now. So you have to give me a second. Yeah, I'm still using my old config. Let me switch my configs out very, very quickly. So...
Do it off screen. Do you have a secret there? Oh, you don't have a secret. It's in the secret store. Nice.
It is. Although I'm going to do this and everybody's going to see them, but whatever, because I've rolled all these anyway, so it's fine. Let me go update my configuration here quickly. So one thing I did forget to do. Apparently user secrets are not stored in the tree, so when you switch branches, they don't change.
Indeed.
News to me. So
it's just a folder in the app data on your profile. So also make sure that you clear them out occasionally, because you could end up with hundreds of files there.
Yeah. It'd be nice to have them in the tree, but then, of course, that's the whole point of having secrets, is that they're not in the tree. So
they're not part of the tree, and you don't have to forget to git ignore them.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that would be, I guess that would probably end up being a bad thing. So, okay, so let's see. Client ID. So I need my client ID, which is our Azure app thing, right? So here's our server-side Azure AD. Let's get our application ID. So, .NET user secrets set Azure AD client ID. And here's our client ID. And I'll go do a secret. Oh, you know what? I used the thing that I used that extension that everybody told me about, and it didn't work.
Which one?
The one that everybody told me about. The one that hides all your secrets.
The mask.
Yeah.
Yes, the mask. Azure mask or whatever it's called.
Yeah,
it doesn't work.
Didn't work very well. So
I think it's a little bit buggy. It would be great to get that back, even as the CDAs or CXAs.
Yep.
Look into that.
So okay, let me put my secret in here. I'll do this in another window so that I don't. Although who cares? Whatever. I'm going to delete it anyway. .NET user secrets set Azure AD client secret, and my secret. Cool. And then the last one I need is .NET user secret add Azure AD tenant ID. I don't really know why I had the tenant ID as a secret, but I did, and since it seems that secrets override them, I got to keep it. So,
why did you make the secret?
Tenant ID isn't normally really a secret, but
correct.
Whatever.
It's not sensitive information, so if you have it on the stream or somewhere else, don't forget it's not add, it's set.
Yeah. I know. Oh, and it's user secrets, not user secret. So, okay, cool. Yes. So now let's see. If I do a user secrets list, then I should see them, and they're all there. Good. Okay, let's. So a bit of a. Let's run this again.
So in case you missed the first time, now you can capture the secrets. Yeah. The second time as we verify stuff.
That's right. Be the most. It'll be the most scrubbed part of the YouTube video.
I wonder if somebody just sits there with an app ready to go in some config file, and as we do these, like they go and type it very quickly so they can put it back and test.
Well, luckily we have not done any. Luckily we haven't done any admin consent on this anyway. So, okay, cool. So I'm trying to get to my app. So let's go log in. Mm-hmm. Let me get one of my telephones up here. And
first world problems. Which of my phones is ringing?
Oh my God! When I get a Teams call, my whole desk starts to shake. Okay, so I'm going to approve this on my phone, right? Just a normal Azure AD multi-factor thing with the Authenticator app. Now, you see it saying, hey, I want to do this stuff, right? So it's saying I want to access Azure Service Management, right? I want to access Service Management. I want to maintain access. This is the offline access scope. This is the equivalent of saying, please give me a refresh token. Yes. We want to sign you in, right? And I want to read your mail. Now, because this account is an administrator account, I do have the option to consent for my org, but I'm not going to. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and accept this. And now we're in our app, right? And if we look up in the corner, you see my name that I signed in with and blah, 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 blah. So let's go try to fetch some data and let's see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So up until this point, we've only consented to the permissions, but we haven't... what?
Yep. So we've consented to the permissions. That was one thing that happened. And because we consented to all the permissions up front, we don't actually have to go and ask for them again. So we got my name from Graph. We have all the spam that I get in my email address because this, of course, is like first page on Google. Like, for what? Literally for what, right? And somehow these all make it through the spam filter, which is super annoying. But then if we scroll down, you'll see my Azure tenant. So now my second request also made it, right? So my second Azure AD, Azure REST API call, both of these were successful, right?
You know the exception that gets captured from the handler? Is that showing anywhere on the developer portal in the browser? Like, would we see that exception happening and then being captured?
I don't know. Let's see.
Or it could be silently happening and then handled, obviously. But I wonder if...
Well, and since we had consented up front, for the most part, it kind of already has happened, right? Bolt saw one of the names.
Bolt.
Saw one of the names of my things, I guess. But I don't actually see the exceptions. I don't think the handler actually got called in this case because we had already done all the work that we needed to do up front, right? So let's do one more thing. Let's make one small change and see what we get. So I'm going to stop the app. And let's go back to startup. I'm going to take out my Azure ARM permission that we have requested here, right? Maybe I'll just comment it out. So I'm going to take this out. So now I am no longer consenting to let this app call user impersonation, right? So let's go back here. I'm going to go and revoke these again.
Would not be easier to do it through the portal?
Huh?
It's faster. It's not faster if you do it via the portal?
Yeah, I guess you could, but whatever. I'm going to revoke
comma
these.
on 42. Good catch, Bolt.
There was a comma, but I'm pretty sure that's okay because...
Because not JavaScript.
I never remember. No, it's cool. It's fine. It's just an array. I mean, I guess I could put the commas in front, but that looks kind of weird. I don't really like that.
No.
I'm not a fan of the commas. I mean, I don't really even like the dot in front, but that's what everybody does. So I don't want to be that guy that does everything different from everybody else.
Oh, no, I like the chained functions or the chained building pattern.
The thing I don't like, the thing I don't like about it is the fact that it makes all these Fluent APIs make it significantly more difficult to debug. That's what I don't like. I don't like that.
Yes, that whole chain breaks and you have no idea which goal actually failed.
Okay, so all right. So anyway, so we've gotten rid of our user impersonation in our startup scope, right? So we're not asking for this initially, right? Let's go back to our app. And we're going to take it out of this list too. I'm just going to delete it from here. We're going to remove the permission. So this isn't even one that's here, right?
Whoa.
So this will be the ultimate test of if incremental consent is actually working the way that we want it to, right?
The way we want it to.
I haven't done any admin consent. We've got two, mail and user. There's no Azure permission requested here, right? Just to make sure, let's go over to enterprise apps. And there are no admin consented ones. User consent, still one total user, and that user is not me. It's a different user in my directory. So, good. So we're all good here. You'll notice there's also no Azure REST API listed here, right? So let's do this. Let's do the time warp again. So we're going to go to, I got to run the app. That would be helpful. .NET run. We're going to run the app.
I don't know why it's not working.
And now I've got to sign in. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in. John@jpd.ms. Next. Get signed in here. And I'm doing this in private just so that we don't have to worry about any caches hanging over. So I'm going to do this on my phone. Approve. Yeah, that's fine. Now, if we look at our consent screen now, we want to maintain access to data, sign you in to read your profile, and read your mail. If you remember the one that we just did a minute ago, that did not have, or that did have access Azure, the Azure REST API, right?
Yep.
So I haven't been asked to consent to that. So to Azure AD has no idea that I have anything to do with the REST API right now, right? So we're going to accept this. Cool, accepted, right? So now we're here. So we're signed in. Oops. So we're signed in. Still got my name up here in the corner. All that looks good. Now when we go to fetch data, in theory...
we should be prompted.
In theory, we're going to try to get that token for the Azure REST API. It's going to fail, and the exception handler is going to do the hard work of going and actually asking me to consent to that. So let's try that. Okay. Oh, so it failed. Now I've been redirected. I didn't do anything. I just tried to do the thing. So now it's failed, and it looks like it's continuing to fail, and I'm not entirely sure why. It's failing because the scopes are incorrect. So maybe I don't have the correct scope in my code. So let's go look. So,
the one that you asked later? Okay.
Yeah, so you'll notice too, if we look in the logs, it ends up doing quite a bit, but we do see a few errors here. So we tried to go here to go get a token, and then msal failed. So msal, which is our token library, said, hey, the request retry failed. it's an invalid grant, right? So it's saying MSAL UI required, invalid grant. So is there an access token in the cache that's usable? No, there's not. Is Azure AD down? No, it's not. That's good. I'm glad that's usually false. But we're getting all these errors trying to go get that token to go make that REST call, right?
Yeah, it says invalid grant, so...
Yep. So we made our call to graph, our me call and our mail call. Those were successful, right? But we're trying to make our call to the tenants API, and that's where we're getting our 401. That's where that unauthorized is coming from, right? So let me check our code, and let's see if we are, because I noticed in the URL we weren't actually requesting the Azure AD scope. So let's go to our fetch data and make sure we are actually requesting the correct scope. So where are we doing our token thing? Here it is.
Scroll down, 110 or something, isn't it?
81.
Okay.
So 81 is where we are actually giving it our list of scopes. And what's interesting is that it doesn't, our scope looks correct, right? So this is our scope, management.azure.com/user impersonation. So that looks correct.
You got two forward slashes.
So some of this is a function of the resources versus scope switch in V1 and V2. So certain resources will require two scopes. I thought management.azure.com was one of them, but let's take it out just to make sure. I'm fairly certain we had two in startup. Oh no, we did not have two in startup. Good call.
Not two.
Okay, good catch. So let's take that extra one out. Maybe we just maybe it just wasn't getting put in there correctly. So let's do .NET Run and let's see with only a single slash if that actually gets us where it was that we need to be going. So we get our window up here, localhost. Guess I could do this in the other window now that we've already been through sign in a couple times, but whatever. Get signed in. Approve.
Hunter 2.
Hunter 22, exclamation point.
Exclamation mark. Well, it's still the first of the month, so it should be 21. Go to 2 when it's February.
That's right. Hunter 22, spring 2021. All right, let's go see what happens, and I'm going to try to capture this. In fact, I'm going to get the log up down here. Do this over here. Let's get the .NET log running, which we should see over here. We'll get this, and then I'm going to try to grab the URL too, because I have a suspicion our scope isn't actually being put in there, but that's okay. So, click this out one time. Fetch data. Okay. Now, if we look, you'll notice it's working. It keeps on sending us back, and this continues to send us back too. So I'm wondering if maybe actually the logic isn't as bulletproof as I thought it was going to be. So it's still blowing up, still erroring, still saying, hey, I'm trying to do this. So let's go look at this URL that it's giving us. Because we kind of know what the URL should be. But it doesn't seem to be giving it to us correctly. And then finally, it bombs and it says we couldn't sign you in, right? So let's look at the URL.
It's a feature, not a bug. Yeah, no, Bolt.
It's a
doesn't work.
It's an ultra security feature, right? So we're at login.microsoft.Online.com. We're at our tenant, OAuth v2, and then we're at authorized. So that's the thing to show us a UI. We've got our client ID, so that's good. We've got our redirect URI, that all looks good. We've got our response type, which is good. And then we've got our scopes. And if you look at our scope, you'll notice a few things about the scope, right? So I'm going to get rid of everything else. Yeah, so it's not there. So the scope that we need is, so we actually don't need mail.read and we don't need user.read. The scope that we do need, in fact, we don't need OpenID profile or or offline access either for this. But the scope that we do need is management.azure.com/user impersonation. So that's not a member of the collection yet, which means that when this is running, we're never actually getting this as part of the scope, right?
And could it be because it's not in the startup.cs?
That's where it was before. That's exactly why it is missing, because we aren't doing it. So what we'll do, I'm going to stay signed in. to our Blazor app. So if we go to localhost 5001, we're still signed in. So Blazor still thinks we're signed in. I'm not going to, I guess I'm going to have to change it. I'm going to have to log out in order to change this code. So let's go back to our startup. Close this here, close this here. Let's go back to our startup, and we're going to add this in. We're going to add this into our first one here. So start, start. We'll run this again. We'll get this running. Okay, so let's reload the page. Hello, Maggeek
21? Maggeek 21S.
Good call. Okay, so now...
Or Magic. Duh.
So we've added this in. Oh, yeah, magic. Yeah, of course. This is what happens when two old white guys get on the internet. We have no idea what people are doing anymore. Okay, so we're back in our app, and we've added our scope back to our initial token acquisition to call downstream API. And now when we try to fetch the data, I'm still getting my sign-in failure, which I really shouldn't be getting. So much for my demo today, I guess. Let me check the URL. So it's actually in there now, but unfortunately, it's still, even though this is listed now, because we're requesting two of them, it actually still fails. So, oh well. I guess
the question is, do we need to go back and fix the double forward slash on the acquired token silently?
Well, the problem we're having now is that our scope here, so we've got OpenID profile, offline access, user.read, which is graph, mail.read, which is graph, but then we've also got our management.azure.com, right?
Yes.
So if we take this whole URL, if we were
you're asking for two different resources, so I don't know what I'm doing.
Exactly. So if we took this, I'm going to take some of this and just, I'm going to clean up this URL to get rid of any previous state. So if we get rid of this and we try to run this sign-in, we are likely going to see, it break. It looks like we still are. So what that ultimately means, get rid of this big state thing here in the middle. What this is ultimately going to mean is we're going to have to sign out and sign back in, and then we'll do our consent there up front. So let's go back to localhost. Oops. Localhost 5001. Fetch data. And yeah, it's still not sending us the correct scopes over. So we're still coming in with all these extra scopes. And that is something that apparently we have misconfigured so badly that I can't seem to get us out of it. Let me take these other scopes out. I'm going to take these other scopes out just for the sake of argument. But
yep.
So because the other scopes are out, now we're getting prompted of, do you want to access service management? So this is consent, right? So because we've got this consent, now when we accept this consent, in theory, that's going to come back and be part of the cache. But because we've been fiddling with everything, oh no, there we are. So there we are. So now we've got our Azure tenants. And now because we've done that consent, it's gotten there. So that's the one thing that we have to go and fix, is we got to figure out why, when we don't include this one here, why the scope list isn't, why the scope list does not change based on
when you pass it in
the token that's requested. Yep. So anyway, so that was probably not the best possible way to explain what this new consent handler does, but whatever, we've got it. So anyway, there's one other thing to look at while we're here, which is B2C.
Yes.
So all of this is doable, and all this is doable in B2C as well. So you can use this in B2C. Switch to B2C. So all this is still the same in B2C, though of course in B2C we're not going to be using Graph, and we're not going to be using the Azure service, right? So let's take the incoming change. There we go. Oh no, I don't want that. I want the current change. Current. Okay. So I need it up here too. Current. Okay. So in B2C, of course, we don't have access to Graph, and we don't have access to Azure REST API, because B2C doesn't. Most of the Graph and Azure don't know anything about B2C in terms of being able to secure them. So I'm using my own scope, right? Yep. So my scope here is just the same thing of It's just a scope name, and it's a scope that we've defined on it. And of course, I've commented out our Azure management call here. But and this is fine. This works similarly. So you run it, you try to get an access token, and if you need to sign in, you need to sign in. And then I just go make a call to just a local API sitting here, right? So try not to change the code too much. The question that we were getting, though, the problem that we were seeing was that this customer, instead of doing it in a Razor page, they were actually doing it in a service.
In a service. Yep.
Let me go to the weather forecast service. And the weather forecast service. This is the one that comes with B2C. Or sorry, this is the one that's. This is the one. Thanks for that clip.
New feature announcement. We have a new service in B2C that now offers weather forecast.
So weather forecast service. This is the one that comes along with Web API out of the box, right? So we're going to inject our iToken acquisition, which is our token service, but we're also going to inject this consent handler here, right? Now, what we've seen, and the reason is that this doesn't work, right? We've seen that this doesn't work correctly in our tests and in our travails or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So the forecast service is just an injected service. It largely doesn't do anything except for give you a fake weather forecast. There's nothing about this that gives you anything particularly valuable because it makes up a fake weather forecast. But if you're building, say, a service or a class that's going to go off and talk to some downstream API of yours, this is probably going to be a common thing. Now, you could argue there are various ways to do this, and that maybe using the token acquisition stuff directly is not the best way. Using the token acquisition service directly maybe isn't necessarily the best way to get a token in a service. Maybe there's some other kind of abstraction, or there's some other kind of like a handler you inject to say, hey, use this to go and get a token instead of using this directly. But that's a different discussion for a different day, I suppose. So we're going to inject these two in, and because they're both part of the collection, we're going to have both of them. And then we're going to go try to get an access token for the user async, just like we did in our page code. And in our page code, This works fine. What we found, however, is that here, in this service, right? So we're in this external service. What we found is that essentially the MSAL cache is either inaccessible or unavailable. Mm-hmm. So within a service, when you try to run this, you're going to end up with a bunch of null stuff. And so if you ran just token service get access token, it's going to say, well, sorry, MSAL UI required because I don't have a user. It's going to say null user. Yep. So that was the problem we were seeing with our customer was every time the app would run, he was using, what was it called? I can't remember what it's called, Fluxor or something like that. It was like it's like a way to do like
React stuff on. It was managing the
some state management
right?
stuff. Yeah,
yes.
Some state management stuff for Blazor. And so because those services were running, that's where he was going to go get tokens. And because of that, every time this would run, the user would be null. And if a user's null, that means MSAL's cache is unavailable. And if MSAL's cache is unavailable, we can't go get access tokens. However, what we found is that by using this pattern again of handle exception, in this case, we will force a user to go back over to Azure AD, sign in again, maybe sign in, depending on depending on how it's configured. But the user will go back to Azure AD, and then this will get rehydrated, and then that call's going to work, right? So I got to go back and change my user secrets again. This is why I wish user secrets were flippable.
Before you go to that, can you go back into startup.cs? Is that weather forecast service also injected into the authentication wire up? Because in Microsoft.Identity.Web now you can also wire up services that require authentication. You haven't done that.
No, I have not done that. So I'm doing it just with a normal, just a normal way of like, give me a token when I need it. I'm not creating a client or not creating an HTTP client, not doing any of that work. The only thing I'm doing is including that scope in the list of scopes I need for sign-in. Everything else in here is the same, with the exception that you'll notice that the weather forecast service is now scoped instead of singleton. And that's important because when we do it singleton, the token acquisition service is scoped. And so the token acquisition service, we need to inject that. And if we can't inject a scoped service into a singleton because then we're essentially making our scope serve a singleton, which doesn't work. So,
Chicken Man has a good question. So, is the user going to be redirected to Azure AD every time they need to do we need to instantiate the service or get the token?
So, I don't know yet. We can go and look and find out, but I don't actually know if that's 100% what's happening or not. My suspicion is that the reason that's happening is because MSAL uses virtually anything that's available to it to try to figure out what the user is. So one of those is to go and look at the HTTP context and see, okay, what's in here for this user, right? That adding an HTTP context accessor doesn't actually seem to work either. So anyway, point is, I don't know. We're gonna go test it and see what happens. But I actually don't know if that cache is going to be empty every single time or not. Which would require a bounce back over to Azure AD. I don't think so, but we're gonna run it and see. I just got to go grab a secret. So, let me go get one of these here. Portal, Azure B2C, B2C. Let's go look at our apps. And this one is Blazor Server side B2C. So here's our app ID. .NET user secrets set Azure AD Azure AD client ID. I'm gonna go get a secret, which we'll do again because why not, right? I'll just go delete it anyway. Somebody's gonna clip it, but whatever. Delete me.
Well, wait until you see what our friend Bold has clipped for us. Don't check it now.
Oh, but you and I trying to figure out how to say the word magic, just because it was spelled slightly different than our old brains were expecting.
That's always gonna leave there out on the internet.
We're never gonna
leave that down. Well, we can by doing a bigger failure on other things. So
well, that's okay. I mean,
plenty of failures. Yeah.
If there's anything we're good at. Okay, so we've got our tenant ID. We switched directories essentially from Azure AD over to the other. Let's go look at our app settings. So we've got our one scope that we need. We've got our policies because this is B2C, so we got to have our policy stuff. But that's about it. And we're using our secret store, which we're clearly not using the secret store correctly since I'm adding secrets without on the same screen. But whatever, different store, right? So all of this is still the same. We've got our scopes. We're going to request those up front. If we go look at our weather forecast, that's weather forecast object. If we go look at our weather forecast service, our weather forecast service has a token acquisition in here for our single scope, which is our API that we're going to call on our own, right? And then all I'm doing is, because I was super lazy, I just added an access token property here. To the 5 weather forecasts that are going to be coming back. If we go look at our Razor page, we're going to write that up front. So I've got, I'm setting it to access token. We're going to see our access token on the screen right here. It's called forecast token. That'll be the token that comes in from the forecast service. So let's run this and hope that my config is correct. I didn't forget to copy a user secret or zig when I should have zagged, you know. Okay, so we're going to run this. I'm just going to get this browser window up here. Let's go to localhost. Oops. Localhost 5001. So I'm going to get logged out since I've probably got some old stuff lingering around here. Cool. Okay, so localhost 5001. And I put the wrong secret in. See, I told you I was going to make a mistake.
It's fine.
So I put my client secret in as my client ID. And then I need to reset our client. Reset my client ID. I know. You'd think I had done this before. Okay. We back up and running. We are good. Localhost 5001. Cool, so now it's asking me to sign in, so I gotta go sign in with an account. Gmail.com. Okay. So we get signed in here. And now we're signed into the app. Now, you don't see my name in the corner because I actually am not including name as one of the things, right? As one of the claims that's coming back. So because I haven't configured any of it, Blazor's just like, well, I want to show your name, but I don't know what it is. But that's cool because we've got some stuff. So I'm going to go to fetch data, and you'll notice notice that it still says balmy. This should, mind you, this should change over to the access token that we receive here in just a minute. Fetch data. Uh-oh. See, none of my stuff's working today, man. I don't know what's going on. Let me look back at my code again. Let's see what's going on.
I mean, I have an example that works, but you need to set up your config.
So we've got my get access token for user async. That all looks good. Consent handler handle exception. Yeah, that all looks good. Weather forecast. Or sorry, we're not even. I'm actually not using that. It should be coming in from the forecasts. Oh, I know why. Because I am using the wrong property here.
Oh.
Yeah. I should have thought about the fact that somebody might want to look at this today. Just using the wrong property. Okay. So let's do another .NET run here. Reload the page and...
Dun, dun, dun.
So there it is. So I'm going to log out so we can see what this happens. Let's go to localhost 5001 again. And I'm getting redirected to come over here and sign in. So let's sign in. And this is B2C, so this is just, whatever, random account. So we're here. Now we're going to go fetch data. And now we've got this access token here. So let's go look at this token and see what it is. We'll see what's in it. And if we look, we'll notice that the scope is stuff.read, and that's the scope that we had in our API request. We know this is a token for our B2C thing, and we know it's B2C because we have this TFP here for trust framework profile. So we have our TFP, so we know this is a B2C token. It was issued by our tenant, and it even tells us this was issued by B2C. So we know we're getting the correct token. Now, this is a good question, though, that Chicken Man brought up earlier, which was, is this going to require a reload every time? But now I'm wondering, too, because this is Blazor, what is a scoped request in Blazor? Do we even know? Do we know what scoped means in the context of Blazor? Right? Because typically a scope...
I do not.
Because a scoped service, right? A scoped service in a normal web app is per request.
Correct.
So what... But since we're not really...
We can't have a singleton because we have the iToken acquisition, which can be a singleton.
Right. But so what's the service lifetime of it? Because it's not per request because there is no request, right? So let's see here.
Is it a spa, though? I mean, it is a spa, right? It's almost like a Frankenstein spa because we have server-side components, I suppose. So
a Frankenspa.
Frankenspa.
Well, because part of it's a spa, but part of it's still running server-side, right? But because you're coming over the socket connection, you're just getting updates, right?
We need an emote for Frankenspa.
but because of that, right? Because what is a scope? I guess here's the thing I'm thinking, right? Is at what point does a scoped service get created, and at what point does a scoped service get trashed, right?
Well, look at that. Scope dependency on Blazor will inject the same instance into every object. It's very similar to singleton.
However, the difference is that a scoped instance is not shared by all users. In classic ASP.NET MVC app, a new dependency injection created, blah, blah, blah. First object that depends on it will receive a new instance, and that new instance will be cached away in the injection container, okay? Any object requesting the same dependency type will receive... So that's singleton, right?
Like a logging service, right? That should be a singleton shared by all users. The authentication service should not be shared by all users. Should be user dependent.
Right. So this is the net, right? Scoped instances enable us to register dependencies single instance per user rather than single instance per application. And so in MVC, there's no okay. So there's no per request scope in Blazor, which is kind of what we expected, right?
That's right. I think Bolt has it. It's a single node per user, which I think it's the
Yep.
summary of what we're trying to allude.
Which is good because that means that once our weather forecast service, right? Once our weather forecast service is instantiated,
Yep.
it's going to get a scoped token acquisition service. If that token acquisition service is empty, which is the behavior that we were seeing when it's in service, not when it's in a Razor page, when that's empty, which is what we were seeing, then you'll go through handle exception, which handles it the one time, and then you're done. And now that user is not going to be redirected again because that user's token acquisition cache, for lack of a better term, will be available, right?
Yep.
So there you go. So we should definitely test it and make sure that that's what's actually happening. But that would be my suspicion, is that because it is, as Bolt says, singleton per user, once you've done this, you're kind of done. So anyway. Hey, look, Microsoft Developer just ticked over 100,000 views. I'm glad that we could be here to share that with everybody.
Well done. How did you see that?
It's on the stream manager thing. So anyway,
Yes.
so we're going to get out of here. It's 2 o'clock. I'm hungry. I need some lunch. Tuesday. So tomorrow we've got Identity Crisis in the morning, right? Good morning, Eclipsing Sun. Tomorrow we got Identity Crisis at 11. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about components of identity systems. So directories and all that sort of fun stuff. And then Friday we've got Sean Weitzel here to talk Pulumi.
Yes.
See the DevOps theme, or a constant DevOps theme. Eclipsing Sun, it is Synthwave. The theme is Synthwave 84. One of my favorite ones. It's so interesting and cool that you have to break VS Code. You have to break VS Code files. So it's. But
unlike my boring one that nobody asks about.
But anyway,
it's fine. I feel okay.
But I love it. So yeah, so Friday we're gonna have Sean here. In the interim, feel free to send us a note at 45show@microsoft.com. Join the Discord. We'll make sure that links get here on. Eclipsing Sun, you were just in time for us to be leaving. I'm so sorry. We're about to leave.
But it will be on our YouTube channel, so I'm going to put our information down here. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel because every stream that we do also ends up there. And we'll probably cut and slice today's stream into 2 different bits because we had UI testing with our good friend and MVP, Microsoft MVP Eunice this morning. And then we switched to Blazor Server authentication and all the nuances that you need to know about. We'll have things optimized for you. So make sure you follow the YouTube channel so you get all the links and everything we talked about. And there might be a couple of blog posts coming out of this as well.
Yeah. So come hang out with us tomorrow morning. We'll be on for an hour, and then we will be back Friday. And join the Discord, send us an email, and until we see everybody again, ping us on Twitter and let us know how we can help you get on. One last thing too before we go. We always ask for this, but if you're interested in becoming any sort of like a reference customer, or if you're happy to talk to other customers who are interested in work that you've done with Microsoft Identity, be it Azure AD, B2C, Graph, if you're interested in talking to other customers about that and you want us to connect you with some, or you'd be interested in doing that, please send us an email, 45show@microsoft.com, because we're going to be we're absolutely looking for customer-to-customer kind of connections. We want to make those happen. So anyway, until then, we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon, and
stay safe.
Care. Bye.
Bye.